Hello and welcome everyone. In this video I'm going to compare 4 different frequency shifters, and I think all of them are Bode frequency shifters, but I'm not entirely sure. The frequency shifters that I'm going to compare are the native frequency shifter of Bitwig, AudioQAM, AudioQAM, I don't know how it is pronounced, full bucket frequency shifter, and Echobode. AudioQAM and full bucket frequency shifter are free, so let's see what this test will yield. For this test I prepared a little project and it sounds like this. Frequency shifters are often used on drums, like here the kick and the snare, so this is going to be interesting. Also there is a bass line in the low end, chords in the mid range, and an arp that is pretty much high in the top end but not entirely top end. So we can examine how the frequency shifters act on the different, let's say, ranges of frequencies. I prepared 3 tests. The first one will just test how all of these frequency shifters sound on 142 Hz. The second test tests how these frequency shifters sound in the feedback path of a delay, because Echobode is a delay with a frequency shifter in the feedback path. So it just makes sense to compare the plugins like that when Echobode is also in the comparison. And then I will show you some special use cases for frequency shifters where I just find that they really show the sweet spot of the given plugins. Let's start with the first tests. Starting with the Bitwig frequency shifter, it sounds like this. Yeah, it is just a frequency shifter. Straight to the point, easy to use. Nice. Now going on with the AudioQAM. And you probably noticed that it sounds basically the same as the Bitwig frequency shifter, which is why I think that the Bitwig frequency shifter must be a Bode frequency shifter as well, since this one claims to be a Bode frequency shifter. By the way, link in the description. Now, it was kind of hard to set this to exactly 142 because you cannot Ctrl click on this or Alt click on this to type in a value. You have to hold Shift and go to the value that you want it to be at. And yeah, that's just not the case in the Bitwig frequency shifter, where you can just Ctrl click, even though you can just do that down here as well. So if you have a DAW where you can have a non-GUI representation of the plugin, then you do have this functionality, and else you don't, which is a little bit sad. There is more to come though. Full bucket. It's a resizable frequency shifter, however the plugin does not remember its bounds, so I will report that to the developer, because it would be cool if it did that. Now what I really like about this frequency shifter before playing the music is that it actually shows the algorithm of frequency shifting. So it's kind of an educational tool as well, which is very nice. Now let's play back the music. And you immediately notice it sounds very different. Let's compare it with the Bitwig one. Why does it sound so different? You can see this is definitely 142 Hz, so I did type in the exact value. I don't know why this sounds different. The other settings, they don't make it sound much different. Unfortunately, I haven't written my own frequency shifter yet, so I cannot say why exactly this sounds different, because for that I would need more knowledge, but it does sound different, and that's very interesting so far. This plugin has the same problem as the other plugin, that you have a very hard time to really dial in the perfect value. You can resize the interface a lot and then kinda find the value. Okay, I have it. So that takes a long time sometimes, and it requires resizing the interface, which is not very nice. The developer should really implement holding Shift to sensitive track the parameters, then it would be a rather cool workflow. Because let's be honest, you don't often need to type in an exact value in a frequency shifter, but for a test case like this, it would be pretty nice. And yeah, the parameter down here doesn't show the exact value as well, which makes sense because it is also defined by the range parameter, so it makes sense that the parameter down here doesn't paint the correct value. Now let's put Echobode here. And this sounds surprisingly a lot like the Bitwig and AudioQAM frequency shifters, even though here the frequency shifter is in the feedback path of the delay. But when you're just dialing down the feedback to -infinity, then it doesn't sound like a delay anymore. And yeah, sounds pretty much like the other two frequency shifters here. Now let's check out test case 2, the delay test. Let's start with Echobode. Okay, so I set the delay to 20 milliseconds exactly, and the feedback is -2.6 decibels. And now I am enabling delay plus a Bitwig device where you can put your own stuff into the feedback path. And there I have the Bitwig frequency shifter. And you hear it sounds a little bit different. It's a little bit more muffled. I have no idea why. Maybe these filters are just not perfectly programmed and always filter something out. I don't know. Also, the feedback parameter here is in percent and not in decibels. So it is really hard to compare these things now. So take it with a grain of salt or something. Now, AudioQAM. Holy shit. The problem is AudioQAM is a little bit louder. You could already hear that in the first test. So obviously when you put that into the same feedback path as the other frequency shifter, then it will just ring out a little bit longer. But apart from that, it's basically the same sound again. Now full bucket. Yeah, so that is again a different sound, but also a very pleasant one. I would really love to know what exactly makes this sound different. And now my special mention stuff, starting with a Bitwig frequency shifter, where I really love to put the mix on 50% and then the range on 4.2 Hertz and the left-right thingy to -42%, and then pull the shift all the way to -100 or +100% in order to make it sound like water. One of the cool things about this frequency shifter is that with this parameter you can make it sound different on the left and right channel, which is just a very pleasant stereo effect. When you're not going too hard on the range, you can really hear the frequency then, and it will not mess with the actual harmonic content of the input signal. Now the next use case that I want to show you is also with the Bitwig frequency shifter, but you can do that with the other ones as well. There you just have to turn up the mix to full wet, and then you can subtly play around with the range while shifting it down to retune the drums. If you go too low, you lose the low end of the kick, and if you go even lower, then you also lose the fundamental frequency of the snare. You can also go the other way around though. If you want it to sound less heavy and more energetic. Since frequency shifters don't affect the high end as they affect the low end, you can retune drums with them without actually changing the character of the drums, which is one of my favorite use cases of frequency shifters. Now next up, the sound design use case. I called this the sound design use case because this frequency shifter actually lets you change the waveform that is used to frequency shift. Usually all frequency shifters, I guess, use sine waves or triangle waves or anything that is just continuous in itself, but in this frequency shifter you can choose square waves or sawtooth waves to get more of a grainy sound, and then you can use the pre and post filters to kind of carve out something out of this signal that is quite nice. So I would say this frequency shifter is kind of meant for more of these extreme use cases. Now the next thing I want to show you is the vibrato use case, which I think this frequency shifter really excels in. Because it has an internal vibrato that can be set to different waveforms, and yeah, the triangle one just sounds best for vibrato, and then it will vibrate between the two frequencies that you can set here. I think it's even better than attaching an LFO to the Bitwig frequency shifter, because when an LFO or any type of modulation is inside of a plugin, then you can almost be sure that it's being sample accurate, which just sounds a little bit better than when an outside modulator is attached to a parameter. Even though one could argue when this modulator is being attached to a Bitwig device, then it's much more likely that the sample accuracy is pretty high, but I just like to be sure about these kind of things, so I use plugins that are made for the use case, like this one. And then the next use case is the diffusion one, which I think Echobode does a great job in doing that. Let's listen. I don't know, there's some sort of complex smear algorithm, I guess a bunch of all-pass filters or something like that, which is kind of in the feedback path of this plugin as well. And yeah, you could probably work out something like that in Delay Plus as well if you wanted to, but this one is just designed so well that I just rather slap this plugin on stuff than creating my own diffusion model in Delay Plus most of the time. And yeah, this plugin, it just has a great sound. My first choice when it comes to delay-based frequency shifting. Now that was my quick video about Bode frequency shifters. I think they are usually slept on by most people. Most people just put them on, find out that they create some inharmonic sound, and then quickly think that they are not useful for anything than creating bounced, crazy sound design stuff. But that's not true. They are useful for many different things, and each of these plugins have their sweet spot where they are really good at.